The chair has actually started by a challenge, said, what can we expect? What is going to happen? I think this is a trap. Nobody can, in fact, predict what is going to happen. We have made mistakes. We didn't expect what was going to happen about the Arab Spring, and we didn't expect how hard the transition will be. So we have to be careful. And I think I would like to hear you, if you have answers to these questions, but I think the chair has answered himself partly. He said the situation is very complex. And the title of our conference about the diversity also shows why it is very hard to predict. Does that mean that we stop there? What I suggest for you is actually to think of some tips, some guidelines that can help us decode the situation and perhaps see a bit more clearly what is taking place. And then in the discussion, we can come back to some of the different aspects and talk about them. Let me say, as a political scientist, that one of our problems is, in describing the situation that's taking place now, what we call the difference between an authoritarian regime and a democratic one is the size and use of the public space. The Arab Spring, if we just want a simple definition, has been the expansion of public space. This is why Tahrir Square, Avni Bourguiba, Loa Square have become international icons. People have taken the streets from authoritarian regimes. Nobody can contest that. But this is where the problem starts too. You have this influx of political forces, old and new, and they're shifting alliances. It is like a bad traffic jam. How can we see clearly in that traffic jam? I suggest to you what I call 5 M's and 2 S's. S like salam, right? The 5 M's. And I think these really embody the public space. And I call them the 5 M's because each of these political forces start with an M. They are the military, mosque for the Islamists, masses for the youth, and then 2 tools, media and money. These are the 5 M's that are shaping and trying to dominate the public space. Not in coordination, sometimes fighting against each other. Just a word about each of them. The military, in Egypt, for instance, all the presidents, with a small interval, 1 year, all the presidents have been military. The military are certainly, whether we like it or not, are a political force, either publicly in the scene or behind the curtain. But they are an important force. We used to call it, during the Muslim Brotherhood period, the deep state. They are all the state now, no longer the deep state. Mosque, I would call it deep society. Muslim Brotherhood has been called al-Mahzura, the forbidden, during the 30 years of Mubarak years, 30 years of Mubarak rule. And they came out in force, took over the elections, 2/3 of the Egyptian parliament after the spring were taken by the Islamists, the so-called forbidden force. They have been manning clinics, schools, even informal banking. They are very crucial force. Even if we call them terrorists, they are an important force. Number 3, the masses. And this is really a residual category. I emphasize the youth because they have been really the driving force of the Arab Spring. Each of these groups, by the way, is a group of groups. I'm simplifying a lot. But the youth have been the ones that started it all. And beyond their mistakes, beyond their limitations, this is a force that we have to count on. They represent in the Arab world 2/3 of the population. And not only in number, but they are shaping the future. Media actually, when we talked about authoritarianism, we talked only about the police. Yes, repression is a very important arm of an authoritarian regime. But the media is the soft power of an authoritarian regime. And a key minister, usually, in each of these cabinets, either with Ben Ali, with Mubarak, with Gaddafi, has been the Minister of Information. Lina Khatib has written, I think, more or less the last word about media, old and new, for the Arab Human Development Report that is coming out in a month or so. So she probably will say something about that. But in a sense, the Arab world, even compared to Europe, has seen an exponential increase of the use of media. And the media has been a basic factor in the Arab Spring. I can come to that. The last M is money. And money has been at the basis of both the revolt and after the revolt. Money has been associated for the authoritarian regime with corruption and with inequality. And it has been provocative. And we don't talk enough about that, but there are lots of stories about this aspect. And certainly money now is what is restructuring the Arab scene, the rise of Gulf countries. Forget about the Arab League. It has died almost ages ago. Gulf countries are the ones who are really driving the different interactions, not only in Egypt, but across the Arab world. And this is an issue of money. I have some data about that. If we have time, I can come to it. But money has been and will continue to be a very important factor. Where are we now? I have been working on measuring the situation as it is. And I used 3 scales. Some of you know most of these scales. Human Development Index, very well known, very well established. And I added 2 scales, fragile or failed state, and the third one, level of peace or conflict. All these scales indicate that the countries that have passed through the Arab Spring are in a worse situation than 4 years ago. And that will continue. Is that should we then condemn the Arab Spring? It has been a waste of time, a waste of effort, lots of bad things, lots of suffering. Certainly when I live in Cairo and I see that, my mate tells me, "Doctor, don't follow your students. Your students have gone astray. They have caused us lots of suffering." But this is the appearance of the situation. The reality is that the problems that we have now are due to authoritarian regimes. And this is where I come to the last part, what I call the two S's. First S is the swamp. The authoritarian regime has tried to stagnate everything, especially politically. And we know when you have a swamp and things stagnate, you have rotten things underneath. When a torrential rain and movement comes, all the bad things in the swamp come out. This is what is taking place. Sectarian forces, tribal aspects, warlords, militias, Daesh, and the rest. So we have to go through that. You have to clean up. If you stayed with the autocracy, things would have gone being more and more stagnant and more rotten. And you had to face up to it after some time. And the last S, for old people like me, I remember a song by Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night. And that actually describes the state of political forces right now. They are strangers to each other. They don't have the experience to interact. They meet in darkness, and they don't exchange glances, as Frank Sinatra said. They exchange blows, and sometimes in diverse directions. No coordination, no political skills, no attempt to dialogue. It is a fight for survival and a brutal way. And again, this is part of what the authoritarian regime has caused. It has prevented all these different forces from learning how to dialogue with each other. Let me conclude and say, again, following Sinatra, usually after the night comes the daybreak, the dawn. Different forces see each other face to face. They start knowing each other, and perhaps after the dark and the swamp and the torrential rain, we have the sunshine. We have the picnic, we have the negotiations, we have the consensus, and perhaps then we will have the democratic transition. Inshallah. Thank you.